live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Today marks the final day of the 3-day extraordinary summit of troop contributing countries to the African Union Support and Stabilisation Mission in Somalia in Kampala, Uganda. AUSSOM, which became operational in January 2025, is mandated to support Somalia's efforts to weaken the militant group Al-Shabaab, protect civilians and create conditions for the gradual handover amid growing concerns about the mission's future. However, the summit comes amid growing concerns about the mission's future funding as the United States informed the African Union that it will end its financial support for AUSSOM on the 31st of December. And for more on this, we are joined on the line by Professor Thomas Mandrup, Associate Professor at the Royal Danish Defence College and Stellenbosch University. Professor Mandrup, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon to the listeners and good afternoon to you, Lulu. Thank you for having me.
Now, Prof, what does the extraordinary summit in Kampala indicate about the future of the AU's role in stabilizing Somalia?
It's at a very critical stage. As you mentioned, the Americans have long been unhappy with the way the mission has been running, or the result of the security situation in Somalia. Where there's been lack of progress, substantial progress, and sustainable peace being created. So it's not surprising that the Americans now decided that they will not support or stop the support for the UN logistical support mission, which is the backbone of the African Union's AUSSOM mission in Somalia. It's important to remember that you have like three missions in Somalia. You have the AUSSOM, which is the military part, which is the African Union force, and then you have two UN missions. One is political, and the other one is UNSOS, which is providing all the logistics, I would say, logistical support, intelligence, these kind of things for the AUSSOM.
And how significant is AUSSOM's role, I beg your pardon, in containing the threat posed by Al-Shabaab in Somalia? And what are the risks that could arise if the mission's capacity is reduced?
Yeah, one could say that, as I said, that we've seen some progress from AUSSOM and from the Somali security forces here for the last 6 months. We've had some military progress, but at the same time, we've seen Al-Shabaab as not being defeated at all. They have also regained initiative in certain areas. So we are in a situation where, with the new AUSSOM mandate, it was realized that you needed a slow transition for handing over the responsibility for security to the Somali security forces. That was supposed to end by 2029. The risk, of course, now being that without logistical support, AUSSOM cannot operate. So the AU is currently faced with a situation where they must convince the Americans to continue supporting UNSOS, which is the logistical part, which is not very likely. Alternatively, they have to develop an African capacity or get others to do it. They could be the East African Standby Force, for instance, but they haven't got the capacity to support such a big force. We have to remember the AUSSOM is 12,000 troops on the ground. Or alternatively, they will have to have a quick withdrawal and close down of the mission, which would leave the Somalis in a very dire state, because first of all, that Shabaab is still strong, as I mentioned. The other thing is that we have a situation where the political environment in Somalia is extremely fragmented, and there's a political crisis between the opposition and the current prime minister and the government. They have postponed the elections the next year, and there's been very little will and progress for the Somalis to take responsibility for their own security, which of course is also why the Americans say, okay, now enough is enough, because if the Somalis themselves do not want to take responsibility or are not able to do, should we then just continue in a situation which is so difficult? So the AU is really in a dire state, and the problem is, of course, for the regional states and the countries like Ethiopia and Djibouti, Kenya, that have direct security concerns related to Somalia. This is extremely important, and it's very, very difficult. And they can basically not afford to lose the gains that AUSSOM or the AU has had since they started the first operation back in 2007. And the risk, of course, is that if you close the mission, it could be that you see a folding of the Somali security forces, and you could have a situation which would be extremely difficult and dangerous for the neighboring states as well. As of course, on top of that, also internally in Somalia, the security situation could be very dire.
And just in wrapping up, you've touched on a number of areas where there are issues, but one thing I want to go back to is the issue of Somalia having the ability to govern themselves. What are the biggest challenges that they have, and the fact that whether it is willingness or whether that is just them being incapable of governing? What is the biggest issue there?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that both as a practical security issue, which of course it's been very slow in building up local security forces. Right now we have Somali security forces, which are around 20,000 plus troops. Then you have local militias from the federal states. But basically, you haven't got security structures that are able or capable of maintaining security and take over from AUSSOM, and that's the security part of that. And you can argue, why has the Somalis been slow in building this up? Why have we seen so many desertions from new recruits and others from the Somali security forces? That one thing. The other thing, and maybe the more important part, is the political situation, where there's still unresolved issues around the distribution of power between the federal states and the central government. To what extent? So basically, what should a future of Somalia look like? Who is in charge? How much control does the central government have towards the federal states and their institutions? And there's been no agreement on that. And then on top of that, as I mentioned, we've seen parliament, which of course we have to remember is not democratic elected in the way we could normally see, with one man, one person, one vote. But that system, they changed the constitution and delayed the elections that were supposed to have taken place by May this year to next year, which have created a lot of political skirmishes, which we saw. Whether it was 2 months ago, where we had the big brawls and clashes between the opposition supporters and security forces in Mogadishu. So we have a lot of issues at the same time. So it's a way that Somalis cannot agree amongst themselves, and it's very difficult from an outside force to create progress if the local authorities and local stakeholders do not take responsibility and try to find a solution that is sustainable. And that's what the EU has been faced with since 2007. And of course, the risk, of course, with all this is, if the mission closes now, the risk is that we lose everything that, despite the criticisms towards what's going on, has been achieved since 2007.
Well, Prof, it's been a good one. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. That's Professor Thomas Mandrup, Associate Professor at the Royal Danish Defence College and Stellenbosch University, joining us on the line. It is 12:30, and our news headlines up next.
SABC News.